In this lesson, we're going to talk about naming ionic compounds. So last week, we focused on writing formulas for ionic compounds. So remember when we took something like Li1 positive and combined it with Cl1 negative to get LiCl. So this is called an ionic compound. And we know it's an ionic compound because it involves a metal interacting with a nonmetal, or a cation interacting with an anion. So lithium here is our metal, or the cation, interacting with chlorine, our anion and our nonmetal, to form a compound. So we have a positive and a negative joining together to form a compound that's no longer charged. It has an overall charge of 0. So this is what an ionic compound is. So there are some rules to naming ionic compounds. So let's take LiCl, the compound that we just formed, and go through the steps to naming the compound. Step number 1 in naming ionic compounds is to name the metal, and we name that straight from the periodic table. So in this case, we would just say lithium. And you don't need to worry about capitalizing anything. Alright, step number 2 says name the nonmetal. And there are 2 steps to this. The first step is to write the root of the name from the periodic table. And step number 2 says to add IDE ending. So in this case, our root of our nonmetal is chlor, and when we add the IDE ending, we get chloride. So the whole name of this entire compound then is lithium chloride. So you might be asking yourself, how did I know that chlor was the root of chlorine? Well, let's talk about that. In your notes, I want you to go through and list the roots of all the nonmetals that we're going to be using in class. So first off, the root for oxygen is ox, just OX. So when we put that on to the end of a name, it would be oxide. The root for phosphorus is phos, phospha. So again, when we add the IDE, we would get phosphide. Everything I'm writing in black needs to go in your notes because you need to remember these. For nitrogen, the root is nitr. So again, adding the IDE, we would have nitride. Next up is sulfur, which is a little bit different, and this is just sulf. So it would make sulfide. Se is selenium, and the root of that is sel N. Right. These are the most uncommon ones, or the ones that are strange or have strange roots. The rest of them So fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. Just take off the INE and add IDE. So this is fluor, chlorine is chlor, bromine is brome, and iodine is iode. And then of course the IDE. It's going to be important to have these in your notes so that you can reference them and hopefully get more comfortable with using them as we do a practice. So all these that I have written in black, you're going to need to remember so that when we do the naming, you'll be able to name them without any trouble. So as we go through this, you're going to need to remember the rules for naming and these prefixes or the roots of all of the nonmetals that we're going to use. So let's do an example. Let's do the formula for sodium bonding with fluorine. Alright, well the first thing we have to do is write the formula. Well, sodium, if you look at the periodic table, forms a +1 or 1 positive charge, and fluorine is 1 negative or -1. Because they are the same number, we just need one of each. So our formula is NaF. Step number 1 in naming says name the metal. Well, underlined in red is our metal, so that is sodium. Make sure that if you don't have a periodic table handy, so pause the video, grab a periodic table to make sure that you can find the names of these. And step number 2 says name the nonmetal with the root first, so F-L-U-O-R, fluor, and then add IDE. Then put them together. So the answer to NaF, or its name, is sodium fluoride. If you weren't able to write this down in your notebook, please pause this video and write this down so that you can have it to research or to reference later. The next example I want to do is where calcium bonds with oxygen. Again, first step is to determine the charges because we have to write the formula. If you look at the periodic table, Ca is +2 or 2 positive, oxygen is 2 minus or -2. And again, they are opposites, the same number, just opposites, so we just need one of each. So our formula is CaO. Step number 1 says name the metal. In this case, it's calcium. Step number 2 says name the root of the nonmetal, so ox, then add IDE. Then when you put them together, you get calcium oxide. And there is a space between the metal and the nonmetal name. There is a space there. Next example. Let's do the bond between aluminum and iodine. Excuse me. Well, first step, aluminum has a 3 positive charge. Iodine has a 1 negative charge. They're not the same number, so we can cross the swords. So bring the 3 down here and the 1 down after aluminum, and your formula becomes Al1I3. And nothing changes just because there's different numbers here. Nothing changes about the naming. Step number 1 says still name the metal, which in this case is aluminum. Step number 2 says name the root of the nonmetal, which our nonmetal is underlined in red. It's just iode. And then to add the IDE ending. So then we combine them and we get aluminum iodide. Now, spelling is going to be really, really important in this unit, so make sure that you practice a lot and really, really read the periodic table as you go through these examples. If you need to use the black plastic periodic tables that I have in my classroom, that's perfect. Lastly, I want to offer you 3 practice problems to finish up before I send you to do your practice work. Now, I want you to pause the video, go through these examples in your notebook, and then play the video again to see if you are correct. Well, step number one says to name the metal, which in this case is potassium. And if we name our nonmetal with the root, which is sulf, and add the IDE ending, we have potassium sulfide. Number 2, if we name our metal is magnesium. The root of our nonmetal is chlor. Add the IDE ending, you get magnesium chloride. Next up, in number 3, we have aluminum as our metal. And phosphorus is our nonmetal, which has a root of phos, and add IDE. I wanted to take you back to this slide to remind you that it's important that you have these roots written down so that when a phosphorus, for example, is bonded with a metal, you will know what to call it. So remember, all of these that we've been doing end in IDE, everything. So these are all the beginnings in black that you need to know and then add IDE too. You will not be given this list, so you got to make sure that you familiarize yourself with it enough to be able to tell me what the names of this stuff are. So if you need to make flashcards, I can get you some note cards next class, but I want you to do your best to really, really practice these if you have to write them over and over again, kind of like spelling words. So if you're feeling comfortable, go ahead and do the practice worksheet that's on my homework. Otherwise, go back through this video again and try to see if you can really pinpoint some questions that you might have. Then email me if you have further questions. Have a good day.